"Is this how you imagined finding your neighbor?" she said, her blonde hair loose around her shoulders, the morning light cutting across her like she'd planned it. I looked at her once. Took my time. "No," I said. "Better." She picked up the flower stems from the counter without breaking eye contact. "Then stay. I might need a hand with something heavy." I stayed. "Obviously. Before we begin, has someone ever made you forget every reason you had to walk away? Drop it in the comments, hit subscribe, and let's get into it. My name is Mason Cole. I'm 34, and I build things for a living. Custom cabinetry, millwork, the kind of fitted shelving that makes a room feel like it was always meant to look that way. I grew up in Spokane, moved to Seattle at 22 with a toolbox and a truck, and never left. I'm not a complicated man. I pay my bills early, sleep well, and find more satisfaction in a clean dovetail joint than most people find in a full weekend off. I've been called solid, sometimes as a compliment, sometimes like it's a flaw. I don't mind either way. I know who I am. What I'm about to tell you happened last May. I'm not telling it for credit. I'm telling it because it changed me, and because the best things in my life have started with small moments I almost walked past. Here's the first one. I live in apartment 3B of a 6-floor brick building in Capitol Hill. 1940s bones, good ones. The hallways smell like old wood and radiator heat and somebody's perpetual pot of coffee. Apartment 3C belongs to Nora Hale. She lived there about 8 months when this story begins. Early 30s, quiet, with soft blonde hair the color of dry wheat in late summer light. She ran a flower shop 6 blocks away called Green Hours. Some mornings I'd pass her on the landing, carrying sample bouquets wrapped in brown paper. We said good morning. We were good neighbors. Friendly, not close. I came home on the second Thursday of May with sawdust in my shirt and dinner on my mind. The hallway air carried something alive through the cracked window at the end. Cherry trees from the courtyard, the first real warmth of spring. I had my toolbox in my right hand. Then I noticed the mat. Nora's welcome mat was crooked, half folded at the corner, like someone had kicked it coming in and never stopped to fix it. A small thing. Most people wouldn't register it. But my whole life runs on level lines. When something's off by a quarter inch, I feel it. I stopped walking. Then I noticed the quiet. Every evening around this time, I could hear faint piano music from behind her door. A soft, melancholy playlist. I'd heard it through the wall 100 times. Tonight, nothing. Just the buzz of the hall light. I told myself it wasn't my business. Then I heard the crash. Deep, heavy, solid, not glass, something serious. And right after, a sharp cry, bitten off fast. I dropped the toolbox and was at her door in 3 strides. I knocked hard. "Nora, I'm fine," she said, strained, too controlled. "Don't come in." "What fell?" "A shelf." "I have it. Please." I could hear wood shifting. Slow, effortful breathing. I had my master key out before she finished the sentence. The door opened. The smell hit first, flowers, candle wax, and something sharp underneath. The room looked normal for half a second. Then the bookshelf moved, and I saw her. Nora was braced against it, back flat to the wood, arms out, both palms pressed against the sides, holding the whole unit off vertical by sheer force. Full-height pine shelf, loaded with books, framed photos, small clay pots. The top bracket had pulled clean from the drywall. Cheap anchors, the kind that fail quietly and then all at once. Her face was flushed with effort, a streak of dust on her cheek. Her blonde hair had come loose from its pin, falling around her shoulders. Her feet were bare on the rug. "Don't come closer," she said. "If you startle me." "I won't," I said, already moving. I got my hands on the shelf above her shoulders, took the weight, and felt it transfer into my arms and back. Heavy. Good. I knew heavy. On 3, you step clear. Don't hesitate, just move. She looked up at me. Her eyes were pale gray, and they searched my face with the focused intensity of someone deciding whether to trust a stranger with something irreplaceable. I didn't flinch. I held the shelf and didn't shake. 1, 2, 3. She dropped low and slid free. I drove the shelf hard against the wall, leaned in with my full weight until the wood stopped moving, then got my drill and put 4 long screws through the bracket into solid stud. Each one drew it tighter. When I stepped back and tested it, no give. Done. Nora was leaning in the kitchen doorway, arms crossed, letting her breathing slow. A long exhale. Then, quietly, I almost died under a bookshelf. That would have been the most embarrassing ghost story ever told. I looked at her, hair loose in the lamplight, eyes still bright with whatever comes just after fear. Are you hurt? I asked. Only my pride. I set a small clay pot back on the bottom shelf. She watched me do it. Thank you, Mason, she said softly. I told her it was nothing. I told myself the same thing, all the way back to my apartment, while the May rain started against the window. It wasn't nothing. I already knew that. I just didn't know yet what it was going to become. 3 days after the shelf, Nora knocked on my door with a plate of homemade cookies and an expression I didn't know how to read. The cookies were good. The expression was trouble. She handed me the plate, thanked me again for Thursday, and then stood in my doorway for a moment too long, turning her phone over in her hands like she was working up to something. Can I ask you something strange? She said. Depends how strange. She looked at her phone, then at me. My parents are coming. This weekend. They're driving up from Portland and staying 4 days. Okay, I said. And last month, when my mom called and asked, in that specific way she asks, whether I was seeing anyone, I panicked. She paused. I told her yes. I waited. I told her his name was Mason, that he lived in the building, that he was kind and dependable and helped when things broke. She met my eyes. I was looking at your door when I said it. I don't know why. It just came out. The hallway was quiet. Outside, the May evening was turning gold through the window at the end of the corridor, and the air coming in carried the faint sweetness of the cherry trees in bloom below. I looked at her for a long moment. You want me to pretend to be your boyfriend? Only for 4 days, she said quickly. You wouldn't have to do much. A few dinners. Maybe a walk. Just be present, be yourself, and don't tell them I invented you. I should have said no. It was a reasonable place to draw a line. I barely knew this woman. I had fixed her shelf and eaten her cookies, and that was the full extent of our relationship. But she was looking at me with those pale gray eyes, steady and a little ashamed, not performing helplessness, not manipulating, just asking, plainly, for something she needed, and being honest about the fact that she'd gotten herself into a corner. I respected that more than I expected to. What are they like? I asked. She exhaled. My mom, Diane, is warm. She'll want to know everything about you, your family, your work, whether you eat enough vegetables. She means well. And your father? A small pause. Robert measures people carefully. He doesn't say much, but he's watching. He's the one you'll have to earn. I nodded slowly. For days. For days, she confirmed. I'm not going to lie about who I am, I said. I'll be myself. Mason Cole, carpenter, 3B. If they ask me something real, I'll answer it real. That's all I'm asking, she said. Just be you. I'll handle the rest. They arrived Saturday afternoon. I heard the knock through the wall, heard Diane's voice filling the hallway with warmth before the door even fully opened. I gave it 20 minutes, then went next door as we'd agreed. Robert was tall, silver-haired, with a handshake that tested you before he said a word. Diane had Nora's same pale coloring, the same tendency to watch your face while you talked. She hugged me within 90 seconds of meeting me, which I hadn't expected, and which seemed to surprise Nora too. Dinner that night was takeout spread across Nora's small table. Thai food, mismatched plates, the window cracked open to let in the May air. Diane asked me everything, exactly as predicted, where I grew up, how long I'd been building, whether I liked Seattle winters. I answered all of it honestly, because it was all true. Robert said little. He passed dishes, refilled glasses, and watched. At one point, Diane reached over and touched Nora's hand. You seem happy, she said simply. Not a question. Nora glanced at me before she answered. I am, she said. I looked down at my plate. After dinner, Robert and I stood on the small balcony while the women talked inside. The city below was quiet, lit gold and blue in the late evening. He stood with his arms on the railing and looked out. What do you want? He asked. Not hostile. Just direct. From life in general, I said. Or from your daughter specifically? He almost smiled. Both, I suppose. I want to do good work and not waste time, I said. Both answers are the same. He was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded, one small, measured nod, and went back inside. I stayed on the balcony a minute longer. The cherry trees in the courtyard were in full bloom below, pale blossoms drifting in the dark like slow snow. The air smelled clean and alive. I had told Robert the truth. Every word of it. What I hadn't told him, What I was only beginning to understand myself was that somewhere between the shelf and the dinner and the way Nora had looked at me when her mother said you seem happy, something had shifted. And I didn't entirely mind. The flower shop crisis started with a letter. Nora found it Monday morning, slipped under the door of Green Hours sometime over the weekend. She texted me at 7:15 with a single line. Can you come by the shop before 9? Something's wrong. I told her I'd be there at 8. The shop was on a quiet corner 6 blocks from the building. A narrow storefront with a hand-painted sign, buckets of seasonal flowers crowding the entrance, the kind of place that made the whole block smell better. I'd walked past it a dozen times, but never gone inside. Stepping through the door that morning, I understood immediately why she'd fought to keep it. It wasn't just a business. Every corner of it was considered. The chalk price boards, the mismatched ceramic vases, the small chalkboard near the register that read today's arrangement, whatever makes you feel like May. It was entirely hers. Nora was behind the counter with the letter in her hand. Diane and Robert sat at the small cafe table near the window with untouched coffee. Nobody looked like they'd slept well. I took the letter and read it. Gerald Marsh, the building's landlord, had decided that Green Hours represented an underutilization of a premium commercial space. His solution was a 40% rent increase, effective in 30 days, plus a list of so-called improvements he intended to bill back to the tenant. The number at the bottom of the page was more than double Nora's current monthly costs. I read it twice to make sure I hadn't misread it. I hadn't. When does your current lease expire? I asked. 6 weeks, she said. Has he done this before? He raised it 12% last year. I managed. This, she stopped. This I can't manage. I set the letter down on the counter. I looked around the shop, at the back room visible through the open doorway, stacked with broken shelving and used space, warped floorboards. A room that should have been a proper workroom or a small studio, being wasted because nobody had ever bothered to fix it. An idea formed. Who's Gerald's boss? I asked. He doesn't have one. He owns the building outright. Does he have a property manager? Someone who handles compliance? Nora frowned. There's a city inspector, Morales. He's been here twice about the staircase roof. There's water damage Gerald keeps ignoring. I nodded slowly. Okay, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to spend today fixing the back room properly so it becomes a documented asset, something that increases this property's commercial value. And then I'm going to call Gerald's office and ask for a meeting. Robert looked up from his coffee for the first time. On what grounds? On the grounds that a landlord who ignores code violations and defers maintenance doesn't have a lot of room to demand premium rates, I said, and that I know enough about building work to make that case clearly. Robert studied me. Then he picked up his coffee and said nothing further, which I was beginning to understand was his version of approval. I worked through the day and into the evening. The back room was worse than it looked from the doorway, floorboards lifting at the seams, shelving brackets pulling from the walls, a ventilation gap above the rear window that was letting in cold air and moisture. I started with the floor, resecuring the boards and filling the gaps. Then the walls, resetting the brackets properly with the right anchors into solid studs. By mid-afternoon, the room had stopped being a storage problem and started being a space. Diane brought me a sandwich at 2 o'clock and stood in the doorway watching me work. You didn't have to do this, she said. The room needed doing, I said. That's not what I mean. She paused. I mean all of it. The whole week. I looked at her. She had Nora's directness, the same quality of asking something real and waiting for a real answer. I know, I said. She nodded, satisfied, and left me to it. By 9 that evening, the back room was finished. Clean floor, solid walls, new shelving, the ventilation gap sealed. Nora stood in the middle of it with her arms at her sides and looked around slowly, the way a person looks at something they'd stopped believing was possible. It's a real room, she said quietly. It always was, I said. Just needed someone to treat it like one. She looked at me then, and I saw something in her expression that hadn't been there before. Not gratitude, exactly. Something more careful than that. Something she wasn't ready to name yet. I wasn't ready either. But the meeting with Gerald was tomorrow. One thing at a time. Gerald Marsh was the kind of man who confused loudness with authority. He arrived at Green Hours Tuesday morning 12 minutes late, which I suspected was intentional, wearing a sport coat that cost more than most people's rent, and carrying the particular energy of someone who expected the room to rearrange itself around him. He was followed by a younger man in a collared shirt who carried a folder and didn't make eye contact with anyone. Nora stood behind the counter. Diane and Robert sat at the cafe table by the window. I stood near the backroom doorway with my arms at my sides and waited. Gerald looked at me the way men like him always look at tradespeople. A quick assessment, top to bottom, and a decision made before a word was spoken. "You the boyfriend?" he said. "I'm Mason Cole," I said. "I'm here for the meeting." He turned to Nora. "I don't see what there is to discuss." The letter was clear. "The letter was a number," I said. "We're here to talk about what that number is based on." He looked back at me, reassessing slightly. "The market rate for this block has moved. That's business." "Sure," I said. "Show me the comparables." A short pause. "I don't need to show you anything." "You're asking for a 40% increase," I said evenly. "In 30 days. On a tenant with a clean payment record for 3 years. If you want that to hold up, you need comparables. Otherwise, it's not a market adjustment. It's a number you chose." Gerald's jaw tightened. The younger man with the folder shifted his weight. "I've also done a full inspection of the back room," I continued. "I documented the condition it was in when I arrived. Lifting floorboards, failing brackets, an unsealed ventilation gap causing moisture intrusion. I've got photographs with timestamps. That's deferred maintenance. It's the landlord's responsibility under the lease terms." "I'm aware of my responsibilities," Gerald said. "Then you're also aware that Inspector Morales has flagged the staircase roof twice in the past 18 months, I said. "Soft spots on the 3rd and 4th step landings. That's a liability, Gerald. The kind that gets expensive fast if someone gets hurt, or if Morales stops being patient." The room was quiet. Outside, the May morning was bright and ordinary, people passing on the sidewalk with coffee, the city going about its business. In here, something was being decided. Gerald looked at Nora. "You had someone dig up my inspection records." "I've been here 3 years, Nora said. Her voice was steady. "I know this building." He was quiet for a moment. I could see him recalculating, not changing his nature, just adjusting his angle. "What exactly are you proposing?" he said finally, and the word proposing came out like it cost him something. 3% increase, I said. 12-month term, option to renew at the same rate. No billing back for improvements made by the tenant. And you fix the staircase roof before September, properly, with permits. That's reasonable, I said. And it keeps Morales out of your building for another year. If you walk out of here without an agreement, the next call Nora makes is to his office. Not a complaint, just a conversation. About the roof. About the ventilation issues. About what a full compliance inspection of this property might turn up. Gerald stared at me for a long moment. His face moved through several expressions before settling on something cold and flat. "You're a carpenter," he said. "You build cabinets." "I do," I said. "And I know what a building looks like when someone's been neglecting it. I also know what it looks like when someone's trying to push out a good tenant because they think they can get more from the next one." Something shifted in his eyes. Not remorse. Men like Gerald don't do remorse, but recognition. He knew he'd been read accurately, and he didn't like it. "Fine," he said at last. 3%. 12 months. "With the staircase roof," I said. "With the roof," he repeated, like the words were rocks in his mouth. He looked at his assistant. "Draw it up." The younger man nodded and made a note. Gerald straightened his sport coat and moved toward the door without looking at anyone. At the threshold, he paused. "You should have been a lawyer," he said. He didn't mean it as a compliment. "I'm better with my hands," I said. He left. The door swung shut behind him. The shop was still for a full 3 seconds. Then Diane made a sound. Half laugh, half something closer to relief. And Robert set down his coffee cup with the quiet deliberateness of a man who had reached a conclusion. Nora came around the counter. She crossed the room and walked straight into me, her arms going around my ribs, her face pressed against my chest. I caught her without thinking, one hand at her back, and she held on with the kind of grip that had nothing to do with performance and everything to do with the fact that she'd been afraid for days and now, finally, she didn't have to be. "You did it," she said against my shirt. "We did it," I said. She pulled back after a moment, cheeks flushed, eyes bright. She looked at me the way she had in the back room the night before, that careful, unspoken thing. Only closer now, only clearer. Robert stood up from the cafe table and crossed the room. He held out his hand. I shook it. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Diane was the one who asked the question that broke everything open. It happened an hour after Gerald left, when the relief in the room had settled into something quieter, and the four of us were sitting together with fresh coffee and the particular stillness that follows a crisis that didn't become a disaster. The morning light was coming through the shop window in long, flat lines, catching the dust in the air and the pale petals of the arrangements along the front wall. Nora was behind the counter rearranging a bucket of white peonies, her blonde hair loose around her shoulders, her hands moving the way they always did in this space, certain, practiced at home. Diane watched her daughter for a moment. Then she said, gently and without any particular weight, "How did you two actually meet?" Simple question. The kind families ask. Nora's hands stilled on the flowers. I watched the back of her neck. I saw the small breath she took, the one where a person decides something. She set the peonies down. She turned around. She looked at her parents, then at me, and then back at her parents, and when she spoke her voice was quiet and entirely steady. "I need to tell you the truth," she said. Diane's expression shifted. Robert set down his cup. "When you called last month," Nora continued, "and asked if I was seeing anyone, the way you always ask, Mom, like the answer matters more than it should, I panicked. I didn't want to have that conversation again. So I said yes. I said there was someone. I said he lived in the building, and he was solid, and he showed up when things went wrong." She paused. "I was looking at Mason's door when I said it. I used his name, and then I had to call him and ask him to go along with it." The shop was very quiet. "He had every reason to say no," she said. "He barely knew me, but he agreed, and he told me from the start that he wouldn't pretend to be someone he wasn't, that he'd only be himself." Her voice caught slightly, then steadied, and that turned out to be the problem. Because the more time I spent with someone who was only, honestly, entirely himself, the harder it got to remember that none of it was supposed to be real. Diane's hand had gone to her mouth. Robert was very still. Nora turned to face me fully. "I dragged you into a lie without asking," she said. "You didn't know me anything. You could have walked away at any point. When I asked, when my parents arrived, when Gerald showed up, and it stopped being a simple favor. Instead, you worked through the night on a room that wasn't yours to fix, and you stood in front of a man who sees people as expenses, and you didn't move an inch." She stopped. "You did more than I had any right to ask for." I didn't say anything. I let her finish. "I don't want a pretend boyfriend, Mason," she said. Her voice was soft now, but it didn't waver. "I want you. The real version. The one who notices crooked mats and drives screws into studs at 10 in the morning and tells my father he doesn't waste time." A breath. "I know this started wrong. I'm sorry for that, genuinely. But if there's any part of you that wants to see what this could be when it's honest, I'm asking you. Plainly. Right now?" The room held its breath. I looked at her standing there in her shop, in the middle of everything she'd built, asking me a real question and prepared for a real answer either way. No performance. No angle. Just a woman who had decided that honesty was worth the risk of it. I stepped toward her. "When you told your parents about me," I said, "you said he was solid. You said he showed up. You said he helped when things broke." I shook my head slowly. "You didn't trap me with that description, Nora. You just described the man I already wanted to be." Her eyes went bright. "My parents are here," she said softly, almost to herself, like she was catching up to the moment. "I know," I said. I took her hand. Then I leaned in and kissed her. Not carefully, not tentatively, but the way you do something you've been certain about for longer than you realized. She rose slightly on her toes, her free hand finding my shoulder, and for a moment the shop and the city and the whole complicated week fell away. When we stepped apart, Diane was crying without apparent embarrassment. Robert cleared his throat with great dignity and looked briefly at the ceiling. "Well," he said, "the story finally matches the people." They left for Portland that afternoon. We stood on the wet sidewalk outside Green Hours and watched their car pull away into the May brightness. The last of the morning rain was drying on the pavement around us, the sun turning everything silver and clean. Nora stood beside me with her hands in her coat pockets. "So," she said, "we're actually doing this." "We're actually doing this," I agreed. She turned and looked at me, the same way she had under the shelf that first night, searching for something solid. This time she seemed to find it faster. She slipped her hand into mine. "I've built a lot of things in my life. Cabinets, shelves, rooms where there was only wasted space before. I know that what holds is never the material. It's whether the foundation was laid honestly, whether the work was done right. What Nora and I had started wrong. A crooked mat, a borrowed name, a favor that went further than either of us planned. But somewhere in the middle of all of it, without either of us deciding to, we'd started building something true. And true, in my experience, is the only thing that lasts. Thanks for watching. If this story meant something to you, please like and subscribe for more unforgettable stories about love, resilience, and second chances.